Hi, everybody that is here live and who's watching virtually. We are back with our third episode of Unboxed Healing. My name is Lindsay Acker. If you haven't seen the other episodes, I'm an LCSW. I have been working in the field for 12 plus years. Right now, the area that I work most in is in psychedelic and ketamine assisted therapy. And then we have my wonderful co-host Meredith, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Meredith, and I'm located here in Matawan, New Jersey. I have a small private practice here, but I do mostly remote work, licensed in 5 states. And so have shifted recently into doing more consultation, education, and really excited to be back here with you all.
And then today, our special guest that we have is Jessica Tomich Sorci. So I'm gonna let her introduce herself and talk about the topic that we're going to dive into today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Um, let's see, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm also perinatal mental health certified, and I'm a certified IFS therapist, internal family systems. I have been so wowed by IFS that I felt compelled to take every single thing that I could. And so I'm a level 3, and I've done advanced training in all the IFIO, which is intimacy from the inside out. That's like the couples version of IFS. Um, and IFS really impacted me so tremendously. I had been a therapist for a good stretch of 10 plus years, and then actually saw Dick Schwartz, the creator of IFS, speak at a little workshop here in Santa Cruz, where I live, California. Um, it was like an enchilada lunch, 3 hour thing. And he spoke to a group of, maybe it was 60 people. And that was my first introduction. Maybe it was back in 2017, something like that. And I came because I was interested in this idea of people having parts. It sort of resonated with me. But the minute he started explaining more deeply his perspective, I just felt like my life changed. My sense of hope for my clients, some of whom were particularly complicated, and for myself as a therapist and as a sort of nutty person too, felt just like it soared. It felt like a lot of the pathology that had been infused into being a therapist and the fear about, doing it wrong, doing it right, being, hyper conscious of being careful with a borderline client and you don't want to do this or that. And, I definitely had clients at that time that met those qualifications, and I felt like my work with them had been so constrained by my fear, and the fear was really taught to me. In graduate school, I was supposed to be afraid. And that was super draining. It just wasn't how I wasn't thriving working that way. So hearing Dick Schwartz talk about the idea that everybody's got parts, there's no problem, all parts are welcome. And he had a sort of fearlessness about working with even really scary parts or unwanted parts. And I was all ears. And that day, they announced a level 1 training right in my hometown in Santa Cruz. And I think they said it was full, but there was a waiting list. So I was like, sign me up. I got on the waiting list. The training started. I wasn't part of it. And then I got like a call and an email. Oh my gosh, somebody dropped out. You're the next one in. So I got to go join this cohort. And this is back in the day when everything was in person. And that was phenomenally healing for me. It was just the first community that I felt completely at home in my entire life. It was like, okay, these are my people, and this is the place where I can be my whole self. So all of that started really trickling in. And at that point, I was the mom of probably a 10-year-old, and I had a stepson who's, at that time was probably 12 or 13. And so blended family and second marriage, um, my own, what feels in my body like significant trauma history, and having that new perspective gave me all kinds of new tools for my own life, my own healing, a new way of looking at my experience as a mom and as a partner. And I had already been specializing in motherhood. I had a full client load of moms, and I was running a group practice dedicated to motherhood. So I had that specialization already. And bringing IFS in, it's like there they both were hanging out in my office, but I didn't really know how they'd come together. It's like, of course, moms are the same as everybody else, they have parts too. But I knew there'd be some kind of synergy at some point, and it took a few years for it to start to weave together in a way that made sense and had something worth talking about, emerge and evolve. But over time, what I started to notice with my clients and in myself as moms is that there are very predictable parts that emerge in moms. You can anticipate them and you can understand why they're there. And moms don't generally think of those behaviors or energies as parts. They tend to experience themselves as, in really basic way, like good or bad. I'm a good mom or I'm a bad mom. I'm doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. And by looking at motherhood through a parts lens, I could I could start to offer my clients a lot more nuance, a lot more space, an opportunity to work with everything that was showing up. Some of the stuff moms don't like in terms of their own behavior as moms, has to do with anger and rage, anxiety and panic, what are some of the overwhelm, guilt, feelings of failure? These are like really typical experiences that moms describe over and over. But I started like using a lot of post-it notes and putting them on the wall, just kind of marking different parts of people that were showing up. And I saw so many trends that it made sense to kind of start to conceptualize these parts as mom parts. And that's where I've taken my practice. I've since written a book that I just found out this week is now like ready for pre-order at Amazon and Target and all these places. It was so exciting to see like, boom, there it is. It's about motherhood. It's called When Good Moms Feel Bad, and it really pulls in this method that I created that's like a five-step method for identifying parts, starting to unblend from them. And unblending is an IFS term for separating and getting a little objectivity so you can establish a relationship with your parts. Befriending your parts, that's another IFS term that has to do with building that relationship and making it, a healthy relationship where there's some care and tending going toward your parts. And helping moms just really have a different take on what's going on inside of them, being interested in what's going on inside of them. Whereas I think popular culture and even, I'd say pop psych for moms has to do with being a good mom. How do you kind of how do you kind of deliver good motherhood for your kids? Because kids tend to be the focus. How are we screwing them up? What are we missing? How can we do this better? And usually that translates to moms feeling a lot of pressure and a real sense of that binary of good, bad, right, wrong, and not taking an interest in making that U-turn, which is another IFS concept of coming back into yourself, where you have actual influence. You don't have that much control over your kids, it turns out. We go into motherhood thinking that we do, and that we're kind of controlling everything and responsible for everything. And in the beginning, there's more truth to that. But as you go down the path of growing a child, and releasing them into the world, you realize you have very little control. So, bringing your attention back to yourself and your own parts is a very novel thing for mothers. They don't do that. Their energy is located outside, and I'm working to change that.
That's awesome. Jessica, I do have a question. So for anybody who is watching, who maybe doesn't, and then we'll kind of get into, like you said, how you merge these two worlds together. But for anybody who doesn't have a background or know what IFS is, do you want to just give like a little overview of what parts mean and what that looks like when even you're maybe like when you're explaining that to a client that doesn't know what that is, and then kind of going into how that work, transcends to working with mothers or want
Sure.
mothers that to be or things like that.
Yeah. So, parts are, if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, that's a great demonstration of people having kind of multiple aspects to themselves. And if you haven't seen that movie, another way of understanding parts would be an example would be coming on a podcast. I have a few different parts that come up. I have a managerial part that thinks, oh my gosh, what do I need to do to have my ducks in order for this? And it's a really helpful part of me that's focused on, okay, what did I tell Meredith and Lindsay I would do? I offered 3 learning objectives. Let me find those so that I can reference them as I'm sitting here because I don't want to blow it. So manager parts try to prevent catastrophes. You prevent feelings of shame, failure, pain. They're very proactive. And we all have tons of managers. That one's pretty prominent for me here this morning. I have another part that knows a lot about being nervous. I was a performer as a young person, I was a singer-songwriter. I got nervous for every single show. And it's funny because I'm always conscious of my voice coming in because I was so used to, as a singer, being worried that my voice would fail me somehow. And that was like the end of the world. So there's this scared part in there too. So I know about that manager who's kind of trying to take the lead and manage things for me. I've got this scared part that's more vulnerable. And then because I work with them really often and I'm using a lot of IFS kind of tools, I guess, in my system, I can feel those two parts do that sort of unblending, ask them what they need, and bring in or connect with a, a self that's separate from my parts. And that's a big sort of basic concept in IFS that when our parts separate from us, like when we unblend, we naturally come into self energy. It's just who we are. It's myself. And that is true for all human beings. This is that non-pathologizing piece. You can't destroy a self. It's just there. It's in all of us, and it will always emerge when our parts relax. It's a constraint release model. So I think of it like this. These are your generally protector parts that are trying to keep you from feeling hurt. They're kind of blocking, guarding, supporting, whatever you want to call it, but they're tight and they're constraining your natural flow or your access to calm or courage or creativity or compassion or connectedness. When you can relate to those parts and let them know that you understand them, that you value them, that you're interested in them, they start to kind of release a little bit. They don't disappear, they're still here. And now there's something kind of more open and porous through which your natural self kind of emerges and can hold your parts. And it's just a smoother, looser entity. So here I am, largely in self energy. I feel a lot of calm. I feel connected. Self energy is described by the 8 C's, all these C words that I'm throwing around. If you have any of them in you that you're touching into, you can know you've got some self energy that's not being constrained. So I've got a lot of that here. I feel this curiosity about you guys and what this hour is going to unfold to be. But at the same time, I still have an awareness of those parts, and I'm grateful for them touching into my vulnerability and touching into that manager that wants to keep me on track and is saying right now, you've been talking for a long time. So I'll pause here.
So it sounds like to me, as someone who's only knows a little bit about IFS, but has experienced it a little bit also as a client, it sounds to me it's a lot of what me and Meredith are talking about, like the working with different methods, but really being in tune with also your body and how that feels and connecting those feelings to once you learn about the different parts and also allowing those other parts to be there while you're feeling certain things, not shame, not blame, things like that. Am I kind of getting it?
Yeah, and you might even be feeling the shame and the blame, but there's a new way of being with that.
Mhm.
Because IFS talks a lot about exiles, that we take the stuff that we don't want or that's dangerous, like especially as a child, it really isn't safe to um, experience certain massive feelings. They're just too big for small bodies. They might not work in the context we're in. You need to be connected to your parents. And if your parents are really scary or intermittently kind of scary, you can't really hold that in your mind in the same way you can as an adult. You need to move some of that out of your awareness so that you can still be available for connection and get the little bit that's here to be gotten. So you exile certain aspects of your vulnerability or of your personality. Um, and so I would say like shame is alive in most of what we exile. And as we start bringing our parts back in and releasing constraints and having more self energy on board, we probably will encounter more shame. Maybe, blame I think of as more of a protector. Shame is more of that vulnerability. Exiles versus protectors. Those are two different kinds of parts that are in our systems. And exiles are more like vulnerability. Protectors are more protecting us from vulnerability. So I would say a big part of the work I do is helping systems be able to encounter and support shame and grief and things like that that are often pushed aside. I don't know if that answers what you just asked.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And then if you wanted to kind of get into um, what it would look like maybe to work with you as a client, somebody who either has been working with you or is coming to you, and what type of client or what type of things do you look for or assess if this is the right model for them, or is it something that you kind of just integrate in all of your kind of sessions with whoever you're seeing, whether they be a mom or not, and what's kind of does that question make sense?
Yeah, and it's funny as you ask it, I realize I'm kind of at this different funny crossroads in my own work as a therapist where I'm really not taking on new clients. What I'm doing is offering my model to other therapists. So I train therapists and teach them how, when they're working with moms, they can be very efficient because moms don't have any time and they don't have a lot of bandwidth, especially in the early years. They can be very efficient with helping identify parts and move into touching like the shame and the grief that are underneath so that moms know why they have those parts, and then finding what I think of as like a remedy, some of that self energy to come in and hold it. And this mom parts method is designed to kind of, you can move through it in an hour if you do it in a group setting and really give moms um, a quick but meaningful connection with their parts and with this concept that you make sense. All your parts are welcome. There's lots of hope. You're not alone. Yes, this is motherhood. So, 1 hour, how do we do that? That's a big piece of what I train therapists and practitioners to do. If you're working one on one and like, you, Meredith and Lindsay. I'm a ketamine assisted therapist too. So that's a different territory. I tend to really focus my CAP work with moms because by this point it's moms who come to me. I don't really see people outside of the motherhood niche. How do I bring my awareness of mom parts into that world? Well, ketamine kind of does it for you. I feel like it basically clears, like I was talking to Meredith before we started here, the muck out of the way. So now we can see and be with our parts and we can feel our self energy. There's new clarity and courage on board to go to those parts with some compassion, with some curiosity that isn't as accessible when we're just muddling through our lives. Um, I also am launching a Mom Parts community, which is an online membership space that will help regular old moms who maybe know nothing about IFS or mom parts, but it's a space where they can, again, have a lot of normalization around all their parts and then have some quick ways of helping unblend and befriend those same kinds of concepts. And some of that happens because the minute you identify your parts as legit, as existing, you name it, there's an irritated part in all moms. That in itself is unburdening and relieving immediately for moms. And then to have other moms join in and say, oh, yeah, me too. And to see moms at all ends of the spectrum. I ran a group last night, a mom with an empty nest, hurting heart because she just took a child to college, and a 38 and a half week pregnant mom over here, and then a bunch in between. The same rules apply. Motherhood is universal. And for moms to see that creates and feel that creates a sense of belonging that I think we are all ultimately looking for.
Um,
Mm.
um,
I'm curious, what are the parts that you see in moms that tend to take over? And like, why do you think that is, that there is that kind of universal thing going on?
Physiology is a big deal when you are pregnant and you birth a child. There's a biological thing that happens that has to happen in order for a baby to grow inside of you. And I think of it as like a real loosening of boundaries, to have a sperm permeate an egg, to have that embryo implant in the wall of a uterus, and then for a body to tolerate a foreign invader for 9 months, and then to open the body up to let it out. Like all of that is dramatically boundary violating, you could say, or permeating. Biology has to change so intensely and dramatically to allow for that kind of symbiosis. And a mom's body, when it's a biological host, is going to experience itself as one with the baby. It is one. We are one with our baby when we're pregnant. And then if you breastfeed, and even if you don't, there's still a symbiosis that takes time to kind of start to come apart. It's very like long, slow, gradual experience. That experience of symbiosis means that your nervous system, inclusive of your parts, are auxiliaries for your child or your children. You are loaning your parts out. They're like stuck on top of your kids. So that means more anxiety because here are these pieces of you moving through space without you, and it's scary. And your job is to keep them alive, and your body experiences them as you. This is true too for adoptive moms and for non-birthing or biological parents. It just has to grow over time, and it's not like forced upon you through biology. It's more of a learned experience of attachment. So there's some kind of like oneness that really informs our parts, makes our parts scared, understandably so. If your heart is traveling outside of your body it doesn't feel safe. And I just got a new puppy and I'm reacquainted with that experience like, oh my God, can she get under the gate? I didn't even think of that. And where is she now? And that's how it feels to be a new parent. Is the baby breathing? How do I know? How do I keep it breathing? Am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? Anxiety is huge for moms. And then when you think about, maybe as anxiety starts to come down because you start to know your baby starts to know you, you kind of get into a rhythm, you become more accustomed to your physiology. Also, your hormones stabilize over time, postpartum. Then it's the incredible load of what it is to be a mom. And this is true for any primary caregiver, but I talk about moms because I think there's something unique that happens due to patriarchy and being a woman in the role of caregiver, especially if you have birthed a baby and you've got that biological piece, you are slammed energetically. It's an incredible giving over of your life. And when you do that, when you give that much, when you're that self-sacrificing, there's going to be sort of a blowback. There's going to be it doesn't feel great for a lot of your system. So much of who you are has been put on the back burner that at some point you're going to be depleted, pissed off, starving. That's just going to happen. So I think of that as really like all the good momming we do, that's certain parts that show up to try to make sure the baby and then the child stays alive and thrives. We're so responsible. We've got caretaker parts. We want to fix things. These are very common mom parts that are there managerially to get the job done. But as we lean into them, the parts of us that have been neglected, our own sexuality, sensuality, our desire to go to the bathroom alone, to be creative, to sleep, to have a conversation that's got nothing to do with kids, that's been pressed, paused for so long that there starts to be some resentment, some irritation, depending on how much resourcing we have in our environment, how good of a kind of you know, village we have, and also our own trauma history and how depleted we were coming in. But even in the best case scenario, this happens. Moms feel tapped out, they feel resentful, they get irritated, they're frustrated. They sometimes escalate into anger or rage or panic or depression. These are things that I see over and over in moms that I would say most moms touch at some point, if not in habit.
You had mentioned earlier that, when you were coming on your managerial part, you were talking about the kind of three objectives. So maybe if we want to kind of jump in there and
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, so one of the objectives today is to name moms two internal resources. And I think that's really helpful for normalizing those parts that we have protective parts, we have managers, we're often doing. Um, so I would say one internal resource would be our protector parts. They help us. They get the job done. We couldn't do it without them. Being a mom in this era is being a manager. So that's one of our internal resources. And the other resource is what IFS calls self energy. I talk about it as an inner mom because, again, I'm working for efficiency here. And when a mom sits down in front of me, sometimes it's too laborious to get into, well, what is self energy? And it starts to sound sometimes a little esoteric. Like, are we talking about a spirituality here? I came because I'm so frazzled and I feel like I'm failing as a mom, and I don't know if I want to get into spirituality. I've gone down that road, and so I changed my language and I call it an inner mom because moms know what moms do. And if I say like there's a mom inside you that shows up with patience and keeps trying and cares, and we kind of getting toward what we've talked about today as self energy. That's a serious inner resource that you tend to just give to your kids, but you actually can use it for yourself. So, helping moms see that you're always using one resource or the other, your protectors or your inner mom. And how do we lean into that inner mom for you more? What would that look like and feel like? What are your vulnerable parts needing? And some of it you do need from outside, especially in the early days. You need people to show up with food and help you in just a real basic physical way. But you can get so much from your own internal resource, self energy or inner mom. And most moms don't tap into that or know how to use that for themselves. So that's learning objective number one. Two is describe the difference between protectors and inner baby parts. So we talked about protectors being protective. There's different kinds of protectors, but they're here to prevent bad stuff from happening. They also show up when the shit has hit the fan and the bad stuff has happened and we got to get out. It's like we need some soothing, we need some relief. We've had it up to here. We said stop 25 times and now we can't say it again and something else has to happen. And IFS calls those firefighter parts. They come in when the flames are already in the building. We tried to prevent the fire from starting, but it did start. And now we got to blast those flames down with this type of energy. So in a mom system, those parts can look like, the yelling, screaming ones, rage. Could be a numbing part that checks out in whatever way your system knows how to do that. It could be with a cell phone, just like, all right, fuck it, I am done, and just kind of getting on the phone. It could be drinking or any substance or eating. I remember being a new mom and thinking, I'm not going to give myself any constraints about what I eat because everything else is so hard that I'm just going to go for it. If I want to eat all the cookies, I'm eating all the cookies. There's no rules anymore. That's like a kind of a numbing fuck it part. These are all firefighters that show up when things are already too hard. So protectors, they bring relief and soothing, or they try to prevent problems. Then there are these inner baby parts, and inner baby is my own terminology. It's rather than inner child, I say inner baby because I really want to convey the level of vulnerability that's there. And moms know what babies are like. Moms know babies are dependent and helpless. And we have our own inner babies who are dependent and helpless. They're not necessarily exiles, they could be. If you already know IFS, that can get confusing. I get a lot of questions about that. Exiles tend to be very burdened with shame or worthlessness or a feeling of just being rotten and bad in whatever way your personal system has captured that. An inner baby part is vulnerability. And I just think of three different inner baby parts: sad, scared, and wanting. And we all have them, and it helps moms to be able to focus in on those kind of core vulnerabilities for that purpose of being able to tend to them ourselves with our internal resource of inner mom energy. So our protectors work hard on behalf of our vulnerability, our inner baby parts. They're they're all here. We have all of them. Everybody has all of them. It's not about getting rid of them or some, winning. It's just building relationships. It's very much about building relationships. Should I pause here and see if you have questions before I go to the third?
You go to the third and then, or Meredith, unless you have questions, and then we can kind of get into the question answer if you want.
Okay, we could be neat and tidy.
Yeah.
Identify identify the two inescapable vulnerabilities of motherhood. In my 5-step process, the fourth step is the inescapable vulnerabilities of motherhood. So as we're working our way, kind of getting to know the parts, identify them, speaking some truths on behalf of them, we get to this. And I present folks with two choices. There are two vulnerabilities. It's shame or grief. All moms feel them. You're not going to avoid them. They are underlying, I think, all of our protectors' fears. If you spend enough time with any of your protectors, you're going to find a thread down to shame or grief or both. And somehow it seems to be the case that just offering those two words to moms gives more permission and more safety in being able to talk about those things. An example that I think is helpful is like, I wanted to have a baby. I waited. I was in my mid 30s. My daughter was so wanted. I was so prepared. I'd, been to graduate school. I'd been to therapy. I knew so much about attachment. She was coming into a home where there were resources and space for her. And I loved her like she was wanted. I birthed her, and within like a week or two, I remember feeling this incredible grief. And then the grief was telling me, oh my God, you've lost something vital. You've lost something. It's gone. You'll never get it back. And there's so much pain about that. And then I had this shame come in, like, how could I have that feeling when I just had a beautiful baby? How could I like not want her? I didn't know about parts then, but like some part of me didn't want to be a mom and didn't like all that I'd lost with the entrance of this person who was now occupying every moment of my day and night. I just didn't know how to be with that grief. So the shame came in and made me not talk about it and want to hide it and just feel like I was rotten and I better battle that down. I better work hard to be a good mom because look what I've got going on underneath. This doesn't bode well. This is probably how my mom felt. And my mom was a bad mom. That's kind of the dialogue in my head. My mom didn't want to be a mom and she really struggled in the role. And the last thing I want to do is be like her. And shoot, is that feeling of grief an indication that I'm going to be like her? So that shame and grief got really silenced and didn't feel okay to talk about and felt like the beginning of very bad news. So I like to just get it out in the open right at the start because the reality is all moms feel it and we feel it, in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. One of the really ironic things about motherhood is if you do a good job, your kids leave and you pour your life into them and you self-sacrifice and then they go. And that's if you've done well and they're healthy, right? They're able. That's something to celebrate, and yet they leave. So the irony in that is like we need to be able to work with shame and grief really fluidly as mothers in order to be up for this job.
That's that's interesting. And like I had shared before, so I am not a mom, but just hearing all of this is fascinating to me because like you said, whether you are a mom or not, everyone has these parts. So and it can and I actually do have a question for you. So what about women who aren't sure if they want to be a mom or because of the things that you just brought up, right? Because those thoughts can happen before somebody becomes a mom. Is that something, and maybe we're going off topic, but is that something that you have worked with before with
Yeah.
individuals?
Yeah, and I think knowing that we are multifaceted, thinking of it in IFS terms just helps with all of that kind of ambivalence. Like we're all ambivalent all the way through, and there's no problem. And I'd say we're ambivalent about our marriages or relationships, we're ambivalent about our careers, we're ambivalent about our bodies, we're ambivalent sometimes about day-to-day life, about our kids. No problem. And I just love that. Again, coming back to your theme of depathologizing, that for me is so liberating. There's no problem with having parts that don't want to be a mom, even if you are one. If you're in the process of deciding, it reminds me of some of what I've learned in IFS that we seek consent from parts in IFS. Protector parts are there, remember, like protecting and guarding, and you can't just like blow past them. It's not going to go well. They're going to come back with a vengeance and they're not going to want to let go again because they've been violated. They've been disrespected, not understood. It doesn't feel safe. But if you come in and you seek consent from them and you acknowledge them, I see why you're there. Tell me more about you. Are you comfortable opening up? And you don't have to go away, but giving some space so that I, the self energy, can come in and be with some of that vulnerability that's here, explore some of the shame or maybe the thing that you're guarding against. Would you be okay with that? If you can get your managers and your protectors on board, your firefighters, with that, and you're relationally, you've been given consent to go in, you're going to have a much better result. Your parts may still feel what they feel, scared. They might have more to say. They might seize up again, but there's a relationship here now that's building trust and respect. It's the same with choosing whether or not to have kids. You might have some parts that say, bad idea. And I'm going to say those parts are right because there is a lot of loss in motherhood and it's hard. Graduate school is the same, becoming an attorney is the same. There's so many things. Probably driving is the same. So let's honor those parts that are like, no way, no how, and get curious, listen to them, give them some space. Don't dismiss them, don't blow past them. But let's hear the other parts too, the ones that say, but I kind of have a calling or there's something else here. And just there just needs to be room for all those parts. And IFS says you need more parts on board with consent than not. Like you need to have, you can have a part specifically. The thing that's coming to mind is Frank Anderson talks about medication. If you're thinking about taking medication like an SSRI or something, you might have some parts that don't want you to, that have ideas about it not being a good idea. And you might have a bunch of parts that are really interested. And you wouldn't want to move forward with the medication until you've really talked to your parts and gotten mostly buy-in. You can still have some parts that are like, I don't know. But you want mostly to have buy-in. Otherwise, he says medication probably won't work and you might have some negative repercussions. Same with having a kid. You want mostly buy-in, but you can have some parts that are on the fence.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. And I'm wondering if you could share, like, obviously, this work, it's really important to do with a trained professional, someone who can really hold the space, because I'm sure it can bring up lots of stuff. Um, but I'm wondering, is there even just like a simple technique that you could share with us for moms and really anyone to get in touch with that self energy or something like that if people are trying to unblend on their own a little bit?
That's a good question. I think probably the simplest that would be accessible for anybody. Maybe I'll share this with you. I can pull up a picture here. Um, if I've got sharing permission, I can do this. I think just the identifying of parts is a really good beginning for bringing some self energy out. Oh boy, when we identify a protector part and give it kind of a name or an identification and start to understand why it's there, um, there's a little bit of that unblending. So a little bit of the constraint is released. That's what unblending is that separation of, oh, I see you. I see you. And you can think about this in relationships you have with other people. You can stand there and just yell at them, and that only goes so far, or talk at them. But if there's a pause and there's a little spaciousness, and you start to inquire, well, tell me why you feel that way. And you're listening, and there's now a little bit of relationship going, and that other person feels heard. it's a very different field. I would say that's a field of self energy or a field of inner mom. Um, let's see, I'll try to share. This is all of the mom parts. I've got 29 mom parts. So you can see here that you've got like a superwoman part, a wanting part, responsible, scared, resentful, blamer, panic, perfectionist, numbing, guilt, suicidal, sad, minimizer, frustrated. All of these, um, if a mom has an opportunity to just even identify them, and here's another way I've got the same, I'll stop my share here. I've got the same parts in card form. So you can buy a card deck and sometimes I'll do this for myself if I'm going through a funky feeling. I just feel triggered or activated with one of my mom situations. I'll just pull out the cards that I'm feeling strongest and lay them down a little bit like a tarot reading and give myself a chance to kind of feel into what's going on and which of these parts are connected. Some of them are there on behalf of others. Like I might have a controller part that feels scared underneath, and I can start to lay those out and kind of collect them. So now I'm building a relationship with my own interior, and that's a really different place to be hanging out in than just mad, just reactive, just scared. There's more nuance, there's more me present.
I love that was a great question, Meredith, but I loved when you first said and how you related it to any relationship, right? The yelling and the screaming or the defending or whatever can only go so far. And so when you change that and get curious and ask the questions, and so essentially it's doing that for yourself. Um, and asking, getting curious about, you know, why is this feeling coming up or what and is that's kind of what it sounds like to me. It's being able to look at yourself in those parts. Yes, they're one, but but they don't have to define, so to speak.
Yeah, that's when that term internal family system starts to make sense. At first, I felt like, what kind of, I don't get it. Why is it called that? But we have a family of parts or a community of parts, and they all have some awareness of each other, and they might hate each other, certain of them, and others might be like, I got you, bro, and kind of like team up and start to form neighborhoods in a way inside of us. And we get taken over, we get blended, we become totally in our parts, not realizing that we have what you just described, Lindsay, like the capacity to slow things down and form a relationship, start asking questions. Curiosity is the easiest entry point, always. So if you can scrape a little curiosity, genuine interest up around like, why am I so flipped out right now? Just that curiosity. Let me look at the mom parts and see, which one is it? It's frustrated. I'm frustrated. And then in my book, I've got like a kind of a glossary where you can look up your part and see what would a frustrated part's primary kind of concerns be, and what is it hoping for? Why does it show up? How is it trying to help you? And that's one thing I haven't said. Every part is trying to help you.
I love that. Um, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'll open it up to see if anybody else does. But one thing, I had something on the tip of my tongue that I wanted to kind of use to open up. Oh, this is what I was going to say. So we were talking about in our first episode, me and Meredith, and kind of like you said, why we started this podcast was um, being more flexible in how we work with clients, and then if the client yourself, right? Not the rigidity of certain interventions. And it sounds like to me that IFS can go both ways. It can be really rigid, but it can also be what you're describing as let's be where the client is. Let me take it to let them lead kind of, and let them lead me until they're ready to go to the next part. And I think that's what me and Meredith are trying to like share in all of these webinars that we're having is yes, there are protocols and frameworks and ways to do things, but at the end of the day, we need to listen to our client and where they are and where we start. And so that the way you were describing it in your own way that you're flexible with it just brought that up for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Should we open it up for the next couple of minutes if anybody has questions, or Meredith, if you do, or Jessica, if you wanted to share anything that we didn't touch on?
Meredith, you had said people need to be skilled or trained in. That's true. I mean, IFS is deep. I've studied it for years and years, and I still feel like there's more. And at the same time, I strive to make my mom parts model really simple so that any practitioner can learn it. And I want it to be super accessible for moms. I want, you know, it sounds a little morbid, but I'm hoping in my lifetime, like by the time I die, that moms will sort of globally know that they've got parts and that that's normal and healthy and not a sign of shame. And that they'll have the language for it and just more ease. And while that's a very modest wish because it's sort of superficial in a way, it's not IFS in a grand scheme. We're not talking about getting into unburdening exiles. I still think just the noticing of our protectors, knowing we have vulnerability they're protecting, and an interest in, softening toward that, being aware that our systems are designed for us, not against us. That's what I'm really hoping for. So I have this certification program for practitioners. Therapists largely are the ones who attend, but it's for doulas and midwives and OBs and I've got all kinds of different people who work with moms that come. And there's like a 12-hour foundational training and then a 6-month consultation experience and then 3 advanced trainings. And then you do a final project and submit that just to demonstrate that you've got the lingo and that you understand the concept of depathologizing and supporting moms through understanding their parts. So, you don't have to be an IFS person to do it.
And can you share where can folks access that?
Yeah, that's all on my website, which is jessicasorci.com. I think it might, yeah, jessicasorci.com. And you can find my Mom Parts community that's going to be emerging in the next month or so in anticipation of the book. And then it's also the certification path there as well.
So exciting. And I can't wait. I'm going to join the community for sure. I'm very
Yay.
excited. I had kept my eye out for that.
Yay.
I want to definitely leave the last few minutes for any questions that folks here live have. So you can take yourself off mute and ask your question or put it in the chat.
I have a question. How would that kind of work look with ketamine assisted therapy, or do you use the parts work with when you do ketamine sessions?
Yeah, I do. Um, I like to give moms the deck of cards, or if we're doing it online, I'll show them the same PDF I showed you guys and work through like what parts are coming up for you right now. We'll maybe move into what is the event or the situation or where are you stuck, and we'll name the parts. And if we're in person, we'll lay the parts in the cards out on the floor or on, wherever they're situated, and then really taking those into the journey. And there are a few other steps in the process that are helpful too, and I think can really help with the unblending process. One of which is what I call the truths. And there are, I think, 14 different truths. Nothing's perfect. Some things are out of my control. I can't read them backwards. My child is still developing and is a work in progress. So am I. So you can find, the truths that feel like they help unpack your issue, give you a little bit of understanding, help bridge you into those inescapable vulnerabilities of grief and shame. So we can kind of lay all that out and just really have it in mind. Um, we don't want to forget the remedies of what is it that your system or your parts are really needing in terms of those 8 C's, this connectedness, courage, clarity, kind of get a whole spread out and then use the medicine to work that territory and coming out of the medicine, unpacking it with those parts in mind. And of course, wherever it goes is where it goes. Sometimes it's like, something really different. Um, but what's beautiful about this, especially in groups, is that everyone's speaking the same language and relating to each other's, parts and truths and shame and grief, which are so, you know, universal. Does that feel like a good answer, Connolly?
Yeah, thank you.
I love those cards. Do you sell those or you
I
do?
do. Yeah, I just got a whole shipment in, so we're putting them up on the website. We're
Oh,
just kind of
good.
getting it all together.
Because I think they're wonderful, and I think you can use them if you work with moms or you work with anybody, especially ketamine and that kind of stuff. I love them, so I'm glad that you're selling them. That's great.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah. Anyone else? No. Um, well, Jessica, maybe if you want to one last time kind of plug all the things that maybe you have going on or any, like you said, any cohorts or trainings you have coming up, or anything that
Yeah,
you want to share. Yeah.
I'll pop this in the chat. I just am so excited to have the book available on Amazon. It won't actually be out until February 3rd, but the book is a labor of love and it really gets into all of this, connecting IFS with motherhood, thinking about the context that moms exist in patriarchy and being under-resourced and not cared for by our community and how that affects our parts and what parts come up in moms and how to understand them. So yeah, it's always a joy to talk about for me. It's my passion, and I really appreciate you guys for having this podcast where we get to talk about the stuff that's a little off the rails.
Yeah. And for anybody here or anybody who's watching at a different time, we'll make sure that we link Jessica's website and the link to your upcoming book and all of those things too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today and looking forward to all the things that are unfolding. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here live or not today. We look forward to seeing you for episode 4.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Jessica.
You.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.